Agnes, it's so nice to have you on. Thank you so much for being here. I'm so excited to talk about aspiration, ambition, and motivation because, especially now with the new year coming, it's definitely something that a lot of people are thinking about what they want to achieve next year. I think it will be great to start with what is aspiration and how is it different from ambition? Because the way I look at it, ambition is more specific, it's more concrete, and maybe even like a part of aspiration. Am I correct in saying this?
So I'm using these words in a slightly stylized or technical way. I'm sort of telling you, here's what I'm going to mean by them because there are two different phenomena that I want to talk about, and I'm going to label them with these words. So you shouldn't, it's reasonable for you to have some other associations with them. But what I think aspiration is the rational acquisition of new values. So everybody has some values. There's some things they care about, right? Most of
Mm-hmm.
those things that you care about, you did not care about, or a lot of them anyway, you didn't care about 20 years ago or something, right? So we haven't always valued all of the things that we currently value. And so there's some kind of process where we got from there to here. That's aspiration when it's in some sense rational. If you think that people sometimes accidentally acquire values, that's a kind of debate I'm not getting into. I'm just saying I'm looking at the subset where you in some sense played a role in acquiring the values that you acquired. So you had a hand in creating the person that you became. That's aspiration. I think ambition is slightly different as I'm using the term. So I think sometimes somebody already values something, um, and they already know why it would be good to have that thing, but they just don't have it yet. And so um, I think that it's not an accident that ambition is often associated with money, because I think that money is something where at least people think it's pretty clear why you might want to have it. That's not a big mystery. But you just might not have it yet. And so ambition is the idea that, well, I'm going to say amass large amounts of money, or I'm going to win like the Nobel Prize or something, right? Say you have the ambition to win the Nobel Prize. You might already know why you want to win the Nobel Prize. You just haven't won the Nobel Prize yet. So I think if you um, aspire, then your goal is something where you don't yet really know how to care about it. You're learning how to care about it at the same time as you're learning how to arrive at it.
So, ambition is not about values.
Filling your values, but not about generating them. And then if you acquire all that, you have satisfied your ambition.
If we talk about values, it's pretty broad, right? Like different experience can get us there, but then why do we choose one and not the other?
Right. So one way to describe the difference between aspiration and ambition is that, one way that I talk about in my book is that sometimes we're reasoning from value and sometimes we're reasoning towards value. So when we're reasoning from value, we already value something. And it doesn't have to be ambition. It could be ambitions when it's big, but it could be small. It could just be like, I want lunch. I already know what I want. It's lunch, but I don't have the lunch yet. And so I reason from the fact that I value this thing to how do I bring about and get the thing that I value. But sometimes instead of reasoning from value, I'm like, here's something I want to value. How do I get to be in the position where I value it? And so I'll just give you an example that's recent from my life. In over the past like 6 months, I have gotten into the novelist Emile Zola. He wrote this 20 novel sequence about a family, and it's sort of this it's an attempt to do kind of social science through the medium of novels. I can say that now, but I didn't know about when I started reading it. I just read one of them and I'm like, this is weird. This is not like any novel I've ever read before. It doesn't have any of the virtues that most of the novels I like have. The characters are not relatable or likable. The dialogue isn't interesting. The plots, they're fun, but they're not like works of art. The whole thing isn't very artistic, but I'm like, but it has something, but I don't know what it is. And so I'm like, I want to come to appreciate Emile Zola and his way of writing novels. I want to like have a kind of value. I couldn't have told you at the beginning exactly what that value was, because part of that is what I'm trying to figure out by reading the novels, by thinking about them, by writing them, by reading other stuff about Zola. But I could imagine somebody else just has the ambition to read the Rougon Macquart novels, which is like, here's 20 novels, and I know what I'm going to achieve. I will have read those novels. And it's kind of a thing, like a lot of people feel that way about War and Peace or Proust or something. Like
Oh,
they want to, they want to have read them. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that's a perfectly fine way to approach some novels, is like, I want to have read these big novels. But my thought wasn't, I want to have read them. My thought was like, there's something here, I don't know what it is, and I want to put my finger on it. And I want to be able to say at the end, what is it that Zola is doing? Okay, so now you want to ask, well, why would one take one approach rather than the other? I think part of it is like a function of like how much of a striver you are versus um versus more tending to be a bit content. So I sometimes think like the world is divided into people who think that the worst thing in life is stress and people who think that the worst thing in life is boredom. And obviously, both of those things are bad. Both stress and boredom are bad, and everyone dislikes both of them. But you may dislike the one more than the other. You may care more about whether you're bored than whether you're stressed. Kids care a lot about whether they're bored. Kids hate being bored. They constantly complain if they're bored. They can't take it. It feels like death to them. Okay. And I think kids are incredibly aspirational. They're always kind of on the hunt for like new things to get into, and they're always getting into new things. I think as we get older, we become more stress averse. And so people tend to be less aspirational as they get older. But I think I just happen to be an outlier in that I'm very boredom averse and not very stress averse.
same.
Okay. So I think people like that are going to tend to be a bit more aspirational because they're going to be willing to throw themselves into these situations where they don't even know what they're getting out of what they're doing. And they're like, you're going to find out later. And it's going to be quite stressful. I think aspiration is quite stressful because you're constantly doing something you don't know how to do and figuring out as you go along. You don't feel very competent. Aspirants are just, by the very nature of what they're doing, they're kind of pretentious. They're pretenders. They're pretending to get something that they don't really get. I'm reading Zola. I'm kind of telling myself I'm getting it, but I'm not really getting it. But I'm improving. But I'm always like a little bit ahead of myself and claiming to get it more than I do because I'm trying to pull myself into the future reality in which I will get it. So anyway, I kind of think that's one. If you say, how do you make the choice? Like one way is just like your personality makes the choice for you. But there are tons and tons of other factors. Like what kind of environment are you in? I think some environments are really supportive of aspiration and some environments are really supportive of ambition. And if you're, a very weird person, you might go the other way in the two environments. But like most people are pretty sensitive to what environment they're in and they're going to go with the flow.
What about creativity? Does it matter?
So creativity, I mean, that's just a really interesting category that I have not thought of that much. I thought about, like, I don't understand what creativity is. And I suspect that it cuts across ambition and aspiration. So at least if I just think about it in my own life, I'm always, as you can see behind me, my office is like full of decorations. I'm always adding decorations. I'm like constantly decorating it. I'm also constantly like doodling and coloring things. And it's not like I don't produce anything good that anyone would want, but it's in some sense an expression of creativity. But I don't think it's aspirational. There isn't anything I'm going for. I'm not trying to improve. I'm not ever going to be good. My office will never be done. And so I think that that's one kind of creativity. And then there's another kind of creativity where if we think about, Zola and this project that he had and, of like understanding the human condition in a very kind of historical and socially contingent way of like looking at the details of the world around him. That was also a creative project. I think it was largely an ambitious project. Like if you just look at stuff that he writes when he's pretty young, he's like, I know what I'm going to do. I know exactly what I'm going to do. I know the exact point of doing it. I have a plan, and he's going to fill it out, and he does. That's exactly what he does. It takes him 20 years. It's this massively ambitious project, but I think it's properly described as ambition in that he kind of knew what he was getting himself into from the beginning. But it's creative. And then lots of other, maybe our most canonical examples of creativity might be more aspirational. But I guess I just think there's creativity that's ambitious, there's creativity that's aspirational, and then there's my kind of creativity, which is neither ambitious nor aspirational. It's just kind of um, a form of self entertainment.
Be like it's how you express yourself when you don't like publish papers, write books, but it helps you maybe to get to that state to actually get that creative juice flowing through the books and teachings that you do.
It might be useful in those ways. That's kind of optimistic. I'd be interested in seeing like a randomized controlled trial of like people who do and don't do these things, and like does it actually. I tend to think like, for me anyway, it's just like there's a kind of restlessness in me that is going to get expressed in this way, and I don't know that it helps anything necessarily. It's like I have one of my children. He's very like fidgety and moving. He's like constantly moving around. He can't stop moving. It's gonna be good for him when he's old. He'll never be fat. He'll just like it's not gonna be because he's just expending so much energy all the time. It's not gonna be a struggle. Weight's not gonna be a struggle for him. I can just see that, right? But he is like a that's not like he's doing that in order to do something else or useful to him, or it's just who he is, that he has a kind of restlessness, and I guess that's true of me as well. Um, that I have a kind of restlessness, and I'm not sure that it contributes to anything. It's just there.
Do you think there is any value in aspiration if we don't factor in dedication? Because you can be inspired to achieve something, but if you're not consistent in taking action or expressing, like trying to get to that goal, it's not going to give you anything, right?
Yes. So this is once again like a place where I am going to be a bit artificially restrictive about the word aspiration. I think um, if what you have is like the dream of becoming a different person, or the image or the wish or whatever, that's not aspiration. That's an idea of aspiration, and that may be useful. But I think aspiration is where you're actually doing it. So, where you're actually taking the steps to become that different person. So, if you ask, like, take me and my aspiration to understand Zola, what does that aspiration consist in? I think it's a bunch of actions. It's things like reading the novels, talking about them with people, reading other stuff by Zola and stuff written about him by other people, writing stuff about Zola. So, like, if you wanted to know whether I'm aspiring or not, there's just concrete stuff for you to look at. You don't have to look inside my head and say, does she have the right dreams or wishes or hopes? You can look at what I do. And yeah, like there is another thing, which is sort of just a kind of image that people will have of themselves as aspirants that can be a good thing or not. But I agree with you that that by itself isn't going to get you anywhere. My inclination is it really matters what you do. So it doesn't matter what you wish or say, and it doesn't matter what you commit yourself to. Like commitment and dedication, like someone could like in some sense be very committed in the sense that they're expressing lots of commitments, but they don't actually follow through with them. They might be very sincere when they express those commitments, right? So it doesn't really matter what commitments you express, except if you like make promises to other people. I think that actually can be super helpful. So it's how people can hold each other accountable. But I also think like, you know, let's take like the exercise. Like people often like in the new year they say they're going to exercise, where they don't otherwise, and they might exercise for, let's say they exercise for a month only, January, and then they stop. I mean, suppose they did that their whole life. They've exercised 1 month a year for their whole life, and then maybe that was who they were going to be, is someone who every year says, this year I'm really going to exercise, and they do it for a month and then they give up on it. That's still like reasonably good for your health if you exercise 1 month a year over your whole life. And so I sometimes think that sometimes the kind of, we're just like not very self-aware about the equilibria that we're in with ourselves, and maybe we have to say to ourselves, this year I'm going to turn it around, and I'm going to be the person who sticks it out for the whole year. They have to say that to themselves in order to get themselves to exercise for the 1 month, but that's better than nothing. And I guess I just think that like we are not very good at creating motivation in ourselves through direct willing. That's just like not a thing human beings can do. They're under sometimes the illusion they can do it. But we can only do it for a really short time. And so if you don't like enjoy the exercise, you're going to give up on it. And so maybe the best you're going to do is the, yearly recommitment.
You have to change your personality so you can keep going.
Right. I think that that's right. And, I guess I think the way it is for me with exercise is just that I do get bored of just about anything. And then it's time to just get into some new thing. And um, there isn't going to be the one thing, the one kind of exercise where I'm going to find it and then I'll just happily do that every day for the rest of my life. Like I may have thought when I was young that I would find that thing. I now think no. It's like um I always need to be kind of surprised. I need like a series of surprises, basically. That's the way it's going to have to be.
Am I correct in saying that all those commitments, motivations, dedications, there is no point of this if you're not actually willing to change internally?
Well, so there's a reason I gave that example of the person who every year says, this year I'm going to exercise, and it lasts a month. There was a point to that. It was a month's worth of point. I think that typically we do not know what we are willing to do ahead of time. And so the question, am I willing to change? I mean, I think we mostly don't change that much. So especially once we're, over 30. Like not huge changes are not really on the table. Even if you come to like I'm coming to value a new thing, right? I'm coming to value a lot. Still, it's not a huge change to me. Still, if you talk to me before and after, I'm going to sound like very much the same person. So I think that some of what happens is like we learn to accept the person that we are, and like we see there's other people out there who they just love extra. I know people who love running. They just love it. They're just like, it's fun for them to go for a run. And when I was younger, I thought, well, wouldn't it be nice to be that kind of person who just would love to go for a run? And I thought maybe I'll become that. And I did, I tried, I made myself run, whatever. I hate it. And at some point I'm like, okay, I'm always going to hate this. Doesn't mean I don't ever do it, but it means that I've come to accept that I'm not going to learn to be the kind of person who values running. That's not on the table for me. I think we can actually sustain commitments without changing in many cases, especially if we make promises to other people.
Mm.
And, some limited amount of change is possible. Yes. So I don't think there's no point to make resolutions or commitments. I guess I think it's very hard to separate out or ferret out the element of wishful thinking and illusion that is always going to be present inside of those commitments. But that doesn't mean that there's no point to making them. It just means that they're not like pure as thoughts. They can still be useful.
So does it mean that after 30 we have our core values and they'll stay the same, and then we kind of acquire additional ones, but it's on top of what we already have?
I mean, that's like my own experience of people. Yes. Most people is that they also imagine that they're going to change a lot more than they do. But people are pretty stable, and even before 30 probably. But yeah, I think that what you might have still is, if you put yourself in different environments, you'll be a different person. So you could go and live somewhere else where you have to speak a different language and you associate with a different group of people. You'll find all of a sudden you're a different person. So I think we can all be different people from who we are, but it's not by like learning to change. It's just by entering into a new environment. I once read somewhere that like this is the one stable thing that works for like certain forms of addiction, is just like moving to somewhere totally different from where you lived before. If you have certain addictive behavior to drugs, alcohol, whatever, it's totally changing your lifestyle so that you're not affiliating with any of the people that were. I mean, it's a huge cost, so most people can't do it, but that this is something that can work for people where everything else fails. And it makes a lot of sense to me, because I think we really can be different people in different contexts. But yeah, the idea of like stay in your same context and become a different person, I don't think that is in the cards for most of us.
When you change your environment, you're forced to change and to fit into a new environment. Speaking about addiction, right? That's why people go to rehabs.
Exactly.
I couldn't not to ask you this question. Who's your favorite philosopher and why? What is that resonates the most with you?
My favorite philosopher is Socrates. The thing that really impresses me about Socrates is that he sort of walked up to people and asked them, what's the meaning of life? And he did that with the expectation that he would get an answer. And like, I don't think anyone before or since has been able to pull that off. To do that totally sincerely and to sort of basically convince other people that you're being sincere. And by doing that, he basically jump-started not just the entire discipline of philosophy in the West, but through that also science, because, Socrates inspired Plato, who taught Aristotle, who, like, the introduction of every textbook on every subject starts with, first, the beginning of chemistry was when Aristotle talked about non-generation and corruption or whatever. So I think it was this tremendously productive move, but what's really amazing about it to me is not even all the stuff that it caused, which is amazing, but just that he kind of discovered a new form of human interaction. It's almost, this may be like, to make it the most extreme version of the point, it's like he discovered what human beings are supposed to do with each other, right? So like, you make two people meet and they're like, what are we supposed to do together? So are we supposed to, do a dance? Are we supposed to get each other food? Like, why are we together? And I think Socrates came up with like the best answer to that question of like, why would you ever want to be together with another person? And I think it's like, well, it's that there's a special activity where one person asks the question and the other one gives the answer. And the first person is like, wait, you didn't totally answer my question. And they ask more questions. This person gives more answers. And together they kind of pursue an inquiry into that question that neither of them could really pursue if they were apart.
So is it like sharing of knowledge and debating over different concepts, trying to uncover what life is?
I think sharing of knowledge is already, it's a little bit too much like, well, I have something, I'm going to pass it to you. It's even more radical than that. It's that we can find something, right? So that neither of us has. It's like, say I want to find something in my office. I could try to look for it by myself, or I could get someone to help me. But if someone's helping me, it's just two people working on the problem instead of one. I could do it by myself. But you might think, what if there's something in the office that you can't find unless someone else is looking for it with you? And maybe it's like, I have one part of the key to uncode it and they have the other or something, right? I think that Socrates' activity was like that questions about the meaning of life are questions where we can't really try to find the answer by ourselves. This is a controversial opinion that I have about Socrates that I'm trying to defend in the book that I'm writing right now. So I'm not expecting it to be like obvious that this would be true, but this is just what I in fact think.
For me, it does make sense because let's say I have an idea, but then the only way I can expand my mind or come up with something different if the other person will question it. So then we start to uncover additional details, perspectives, and I may actually change my mind.
Right. So I think that there's a funny thing about our own minds, which is that if I look inside my head and I think about any of my beliefs that I have, and I ask myself, is that belief true? I'm always going to say yes. Right? Like, I'm going to stamp all of them. Correct, 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 correct. Of course, I think that all the things I think are correct. If I didn't think they were correct, I wouldn't think those things. But that means I'm kind of stuck with my beliefs. If I try to like test them or check them or whatever, I keep stamping myself with approval. And I think that that's right. Socrates thought that like that's what other people were for. They're for solving the problem of how you keep stamping yourself with approval.
The last question that I have, and I just ask this question everybody because I'm really curious. What is the best and the worst advice you were ever given, either like in your professional or personal life?
So you can look it up later. I have an essay called Against Advice on why I'm generally against advice and I don't tend to think it's very useful. But I'll tell you the worst advice. It was when I was pregnant with my first child and I was in graduate school, and a professor of mine found this out, and she was very worried that my pregnancy would get in the way of my graduate work. And she said to me, look, the thing you have to do is you have to decide which is more important to you, your baby or the papers that you're going to write. And I was like very shocked by this. And it turns out you don't have to decide which of those things is more important to you. So I think it was bad advice to tell me that I had to figure out which of those things was more important to me. I think they were just both very important to me, and I was just going to pursue both of them. And in fact, in life, in general, you don't have to rank the things you care about, it turns out. I mean, maybe in certain special situations you do, but mostly we do a bunch of things and we don't have a very clear sense of what's more important to us. And something is more important at one moment, another thing at another moment. And the idea that you have to come down on which thing really counts is, I think, not true. Uh, that's a bad advice. What is some good advice? So I think that good advice tends to be very concrete. I'll tell you a recent instance. Somebody asked me a bunch of philosophy questions, and the person was not a philosopher. And I went to my husband and I'm like, this person sent me an email and they sent me a bunch of questions, and it would take me hours and hours and hours to answer these questions and write like essays on these questions, but I don't think I should just ignore it. What should I do? And he's like, how about you and I record a conversation where we talk about these questions and then we send this person the video of us discussing the questions. That was a really good idea. It was good advice. I took the advice. We had the conversation. That happened like 3 days ago, so it's in my head. But anyway, I think good advice tends to be like that.
Thank you so much for your time. I really enjoyed this conversation, and it's actually fascinating because I love philosophy now, but when I was at school, because the teacher was like, oh, you have to memorize everything, but we would never discuss. So
Right.
it just like dates, like terminology and stuff. I'm like, who needs this? I don't need that. But now I know I just needed a different teacher.
Yeah, I think a lot of people kind of, there's something scary about philosophy, and people hide behind stuff like you have to memorize a bunch of words and dates, all of which is irrelevant to philosophy, but is it kind of can make it seem like more of a technical expertise than it is, and can make people feel like they have it. It's like, well, at least if I know the dates, then I have the expertise. But actually, it's just like a bunch of questions that nobody knows the answers to. And so the teachers can feel pretty insecure about that, I think.
Many people think like philosophy is just something you think about when you're by yourself. So it's not that applicable to the thing that you do. It has to be together. Then, like, if you just think about it, then what's the point? You have to apply it.
Yeah, I recently was talking to someone who said to me like, "Oh, well, this is my like philosophy, but like it doesn't show up in my everyday life." And I said, "No, no, the terrifying thing is that it shows up everywhere in everything you do. You just don't realize it. We're all living our own philosophies. And so if you haven't thought things through, that shows in everything that you do, I think. Um, there's no avoiding having a philosophy of some kind and living it out at every moment of your life."